remember his name. He was a college freshman, just like I was at the time. And we shared a class together, a class I was struggling with, a class I had decided to drop. I had rationalized my decision to cut and run in ways that made sense to me. Truth be told, I was just lazy and didn't want to do the work that I would have to do to pull my grade up. So my fellow classmate and I were talking about that time, and I told him I was dropping the class. He told me he thought it was a bad idea. But I was impervious to his reasoning. And the conversation drifted off to other topics here and there, and finally landed on the subject of religion. And since I was a good Baptist kid, I figured I could try to get this guy gloriously saved so he could be living at the foot of the cross. And I can't remember exactly how much drivel I gave him that day, but I did say something about the power of God that gave me the strength to do the things that I ought to do. And he quipped, "And that's why you're dropping the class, right?" I was stunned. He could see it on my face, and he apologized, but he really shouldn't have, because he was right. Somebody needed to say to me the things that nobody else was willing to say, whether I wanted to hear them or not. Zeke Lozier was another one of those people in my life. Zeke led a support group for clergy that I was a part of for more than 3 years. And the marvelous thing about Zeke was that he didn't let any of us hide behind our group, our ministerial masks. You see, he always cut right through the treacle that we preachers so often feed ourselves and feed everybody else around us, and he wouldn't let us get away with any of it. Sometimes he went too far, quite frankly, but he never failed to say the things or ask the questions none of us were willing to face. Everybody needs a Zeke in their life from time to time. Everybody needs a person like that student of mine, a voice to say the things and ask the questions nobody else will say. Now, in the book of Job, it's the Satan who plays that role. Now, you'll notice I said the Satan, because if you have been in one of our grief groups this week, you know that that's the way it's said in the Hebrew text. It's the Satan. In Job, Satan is not the familiar figure with horns and a pitchfork, nor is he the figure that tempts Jesus 3 times in the Synoptic Gospels. The Hebrew word Satan means adversary or accuser. So if you think of the book of Job like a drama, then the Satan is the one who provides the conflict in the story. If you want to build a theology of a personified evil and a personal devil, that's okay, but you're on really shaky ground to use the book of Job to do it. The Satan here is merely the figure in the narrative who asks the questions and says the words nobody else wants to hear. In today's reading from Job chapter 2, there's somebody else playing that role. It's Job's wife. Job's wife looks at all of the suffering and grief Job has endured, the loss of his servants, the loss of his livestock, the loss of his children, and now the loss of his health. And his wife asks, "Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die." Her words are harsh, her words are brutal, but they form the crux of the story. What she's wondering and what the entire book of Job is all about is the question of whether or not faithfulness to God pays off. Here you've been faithful to God all these years, she says, and now your life has come apart at the seams. Has it been worth it? It's the question all of us ask when grief becomes our unwanted companion. I remember a woman in a previous church that I served who had been healthy all of her life, but now all of a sudden was afflicted with a whole variety of different health problems, all of them pretty serious. And every time I visited her, she said to me, I've tried to be a good person all my life. What did I ever do to deserve this? Why is God doing this to me? And then there was the husband of one of my hospice patients, whom I visited several times after his wife's death. And every time I went to see him, he would say, why did God take someone like Wanda? She was always good to everybody. And I tried to explain to him that good people die too, but my words fell on deaf ears. Like the Satan, like Job's wife, like the lady with the health problems, he asked the question of whether or not faithfulness to God pays off. If pain and suffering and grief are going to be visited upon you anyway, well, why not? It's a fair question. It's a good question. But it's the wrong question. Especially during times of stress and brokenness, it is so important to ask the right question. Asking the right question makes the difference in whether or not you get stuck in grief or whether you will move on with your life. Maybe you recall the story of the math teacher who came into class one day and she wrote the number 4 on the blackboard and then wrote the number 2 underneath it and drew a line underneath the 2. And then she turned to the class and asked, how do you solve this problem? Some of the children said, well, the answer is 2. Others said, no, the answer is 6. And still others said the answer is 8. And the teacher said, your answers may be right or they may be wrong, but I did not ask for answers. I asked, how do you solve this problem? And you solve the problem not by guessing at the right answer, but by asking the right question. And in this case, the right question is this addition or multiplication or subtraction? Once you ask the right question, then the answer becomes obvious. In that support group I told you about, we clergy would get to moaning and groaning and complaining about how awful our lives were, and we blamed our churches for it, and we blamed our families for it, and we blamed our parents for it, and finally Zeke would pipe up and say, oh, don't give me that. Insert your own expletive there, because he used them all. He said, we can talk about your toilet training if you want to, but once we've established how abysmal your childhood was and how nobody around you likes you, it doesn't change a thing. We were all asking the wrong question, you see. We were asking who was to blame for our troubles, and Zeke said, nobody cares. The right question was, what are you going to do now? In the same way, the secret to making it through grief is asking the right question. And the right question is not, does my faithfulness to God pay off? The right question is, what does God's faithfulness to me look like? Or a different way to ask it would be, what can I expect God to do in the midst of my grief? It all goes down to expectations, you see. That woman with all the health problems expected God to inoculate her against suffering. The husband of my hospice patient expected his wife to live as long as he wanted. Job's wife expected Job's faithfulness to shield him from loss. But nowhere in the Bible are we given those kinds of expectations. Nowhere does the Bible tell us life is a bargain with God. Nowhere does the Bible say life is a quid pro quo. I keep up my end of the deal, God keeps up God's end of the deal, and everybody's happy. No. No, in beautifully poetic terms, the prophet Isaiah tells us what we can expect from God when life comes crashing in. We can expect God to be involved in our lives, but that involvement will vary at different times. If I limit God to one scenario only, I'm going to be sorely disappointed. God comes to us in different ways and brings a different gift for each stage of the journey. For example, there are times when God gives us the gift to mount up with wings like eagles. Mount up with wings like eagles. That is, God sometimes gives us the gift of being able to rise above the pain of our lives instead of letting it weigh us down. We become, in a sense, new creatures with grand vistas on life, able to see what God is doing in our lives and in the lives around us. Yes, there is even an element of the miraculous here. I don't know about you, but I believe in a God who can perform miracles. I believe in a God who can take the cause of our pain and grief and erase it like lines on a chalkboard. So one of the ways we can expect God to help us in our grief is to give us the gift to mount up with wings like eagles. I've seen it happen. But honestly, I haven't seen it happen too often. If I expect a miracle, I'm going to be disappointed. More often, I have seen God come to me with the second gift that Isaiah mentions. God gives us the gift to run and not be weary. Run and not be weary. John Claypool called this the gift of collaborating with God for a solution. Sometimes God comes to us with the reminder that we are not powerless, that we are gifted with talents and abilities, and dovetailed with the power of God, those talents and abilities can help us make it through the crisis. It's a joint effort between God and us. It's not as spectacular as mounting up with wings like eagles, but it's a gift from God nonetheless. A friend of mine told me about living in Newport, Virginia, when the Catholic convent close by caught fire. And while the trucks from the volunteer fire department were setting up, people from all over the neighborhood were doing their best to try to salvage what they could out of the burning convent. Everybody, that is, except for the priest and the nuns. They were standing off to the side of the building with rosaries in hand, praying that God would spare the building. Well, finally, the fire chief had had enough of it, and he walked over and he shoved a 3-inch hose into the priest's hand and said, "Father, these are the beads God wants you to pray with now." We can expect God to sometimes offer us the gift of collaboration, the gift of being proactive, the gift of doing what we can do, and then letting God fill in the gaps. Sometimes we can expect God to give us the gift to run and not grow weary. But there's another way that God comes to us in the midst of our crisis, in the midst of our sorrow. This is not a miraculous mounting up with wings like eagles. Nor is this even the collaboration of running and not growing weary. Sometimes God gives to us the simple gift of endurance. Sometimes God gives us the capacity, in the words of Isaiah, to walk and not faint. To walk and not faint. Oh, I'm just like you. When I'm hurting, I want God to swoop down and take all the pain away. Or at least I want God to show me what I can do so that I can make it all better. But there are times when God gives me the gift of merely being able to put one foot in front of the other, to get from one day to the next, to hang in there a little while longer. Sometimes God gives me the gift of resilience, the gift to keep on keeping on, even when I can't see how in the world it's going to happen. In those moments, asking the right question is crucial. If I ask the Satan's question, or if I ask Job's wife's question, I'll get stuck in grief and I'll dissolve into bitterness and despair. But if I ask what I can expect from God, then I'll find a way through my grief. Because sometimes I can expect God to give me the gift to mount up with wings like eagles. Other times I can expect God to give me the gift to run and not grow weary. But there are other times when I can expect God to give me the gift to walk and not faint. The gift to keep on keeping on. The gift of staying on my feet. And it's enough. Oh yeah, it's enough. You know, I'm sure if we all broke up into small groups, and I gave you a discussion question, we could tell each other lots of stories about the gift of endurance in the midst of our grief. My wife Penny has such a story. And with her permission, yea, even her blessing, I share it with you this morning. It happened during a time when her first marriage was coming apart. She and her husband were in the throes of a divorce, and it was getting uglier and uglier. Each time it looked like it couldn't get any nastier, it got nastier. And of course, there were the added worries about finances and the hardships the whole situation was visiting upon her teenage children. And then, as if the pain of a disintegrating marriage was not enough, her daughter Rachel wound up seriously ill and had to be admitted to the hospital. She came out of it for a while, but soon her condition got even worse and she wound up hospitalized again. Now, those of you who know Penny well know that being a mom is an indispensable component of her personality. And now here she was losing her marriage, and it looked like she was about to lose one of her children. But life has to go on, so one day she went to the grocery store, and as she turned up the aisle where they keep the soaps and detergents, she remembered how Rachel, as a child, loved the smells of that aisle. Now, other children would want their moms to linger on the candy aisle. Rachel wanted her to stick around on the soap aisle. And that memory suddenly sent Penny into an emotional tailspin. The grocery aisle was no longer a grocery aisle. Now it was a tunnel, confining and claustrophobic. And the bright colors of the boxes and the bottles on the shelves faded into gray. And it seemed as if she was being pulled backwards, away from that far end of the tunnel, drawn toward a nothingness and an emptiness. She literally felt she was sliding away from reality and the excruciating pain of her life. And she liked it. The prospect of just laying down all of those burdens and curling up into a ball and letting someone else take care of her seemed like a fine option. She wanted to give up. She wanted to stop caring about herself or anybody else, let her son and daughter fend for themselves so that she could be treated just like an infant. And in that moment, she understood for the first time the seductive power of a descent into madness. She didn't want to reach the far end of the tunnel. She simply wanted to fall backwards into a dark void where there would be no feeling anymore, and she thought to herself, it would be so easy to just give up now. But then she heard a voice. And the voice said, you can do that. Or you can do like you've always done before. Put your children first. And from somewhere, somehow, she found the strength to say, okay, I choose my children over madness. And then she was back in the grocery store, back on the aisle. The smell of soaps in her nostrils, and the pain of her grief just as raw as it had never been before. But something was different now. She not only had the strength to push the cart around to the next aisle, She had the strength to put one foot in front of the other. It would be a long time before Rachel was healed, and she's doing so well now. It would be a long time before the divorce was settled. But she had the strength not to mount up with wings like eagles, not even to run and not grow weary. She had the strength to walk and not faint. I'm told there was an event in the ancient Olympic Games where each contestant ran with a lighted torch in their hand. But the winner of the race was not the one who crossed the finish line first, but the one who crossed the finish line with his torch still lit. Sometimes, in our grief, we are given the simple gift of finishing with our torch still lit. And it's enough.